What if I told you that you could sell your faceless YouTube channel for $160,000? What about $250,000, $300,000, or maybe even close to $500,000 at $418,000? Well, I got exciting news for you because I brought some data that you might find very interesting if you are getting into the whole new craze. Well, I shouldn't say new, but relatively new craze and interest when it comes to running a faceless YouTube channel. Now, I've done a few videos around YouTube channels, and recently, not that long ago at Empire Flippers, we have started helping people actually sell these faceless YouTube channels ourselves on our marketplace. So if you go on our marketplace, you can actually filter businesses that are YouTube channels. And while we have sold YouTube channels before we announced this new functionality, we never really had them tagged. So it wasn't like easy to see the data on it, but now it is. And so I thought, hey, wouldn't it be fun to do a little breakdown of the 8 channels that we sold so far at Empire Flippers? So let me give you some of the quick hit facts, and then we'll go into a little bit as to why our buyers buying these up and why this might be a bit of a replacement in some ways to your traditional good old niche website of your, right? So on the marketplace, the average sales price for a faceless YouTube channel right now is sitting at $159,340. Now, this is a small sample size, right? But it's big enough that we can start making a little bit of some guesses and estimates of what's going on here. And this is with sales ranging from all the way down to $64,000, which is the cheapest channel we've sold so far, and all the way up to $418,000, which is the most expensive channel we've sold so far in the marketplace. Now, on average, a business buyer of a YouTube channel is paying right around 25x of the monthly net profit in terms of the actual range. So 25x is the average across the entire range. The lowest we sold so far is for 13x, and the highest multiple we sold was for 34x. Before you ask, no, that wasn't the smallest business we sold or the biggest business, because everything has a bit of a range when it comes to M&A, right? We'll go into a little bit of what might make up those multiples too for you. So that is all good news, but how long does it actually take for you to get that juicy money in your pocket, you know, that extra 6 figures in your wallet? How long are you looking at in terms of your actual timeline to be able to sell this sucker when you actually put it on the marketplace? So on average, the moment you list a YouTube channel for sale, at least with our buyer network, you're looking at an average of 49 days before that channel gets sold. Now, the shortest time frame that we sold a channel so far was just 3 days, which is pretty interesting. And no, that wasn't the cheapest channel either. We sold that in 3 days. That tells you something a little bit about buyer demand for these kind of pretty awesome side hustle friendly businesses. Like, the buyer demand is definitely there. So if you are making YouTube channels and you want to sell them off, come on over to Uncle Empire, because I probably have a buyer for you as long as it's a quality channel. Now, in terms of the longest time it took us to sell a business, a YouTube channel in this range, was 168 days. And funny enough, that actually was the smallest channel. That was the $65,000 channel we sold. Also took us the longest time to sell. So I thought that was a bit ironic. I've often joked the bigger your business is, the easier it is to sell, because you just have a lot more like synergies going on that are interesting to people who are putting down that money, right? And this kind of shows a little bit of what I mean there. So the smallest channel took the longest time to sell. Next is, how much are people typically getting paid up front? So as a seller, if you're watching this and you want to sell a business, I always joke that I break an entrepreneur's dream almost every day of the week, because they'll often come to me, they'll like message me on LinkedIn, Facebook, or wherever. They're like, hey, I got this great business. And I have to tell them, well, it's not as great as you think, because the value you told me is definitely not realistic. Most of the time, sellers come in with very unrealistic seller price expectations in terms of what their business is actually worth. Now, the other thing that they come into is thinking, hey, I'm going to get my entire sales price up front, which is usually not true. If you're selling, say, $1 million business, the chances of someone actually giving you $1 million in cash is close to zero. Does it happen? Absolutely, but it is extremely rare. And if there's like, well, I would never sell it. I'm like, well, great, you'll never make a $1 million exit probably. But what about these YouTube channels? So this is an interesting thing. And I think this data in particular will probably change over time. And I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of the actual upfront amount paid to the seller at the moment of closing the deal, it's 90.5%. So if we round up, 91% of the sales price is paid at the moment of exit. Now, this is pretty interesting to me. And the reason why I'm going to say that is because some of the channels we sold were over 200 grand, right? And typically, when you look at an all cash deal, like where does that actually happen for an entrepreneur when they're selling their business? Well, usually it happens at the micro level, at the side hustle level, which I've always classified as any business valued at $200,000 or less tends to be a side hustle business of some sort. And those businesses do tend to get all cash deals. Now, the reason why is like if a buyer comes in and tries to do all this fancy smancy deal structuring and creative financing, by the time they kind of get that package together, especially if the seller's using a broker like us, where we create a competitive landscape for their business so they can sell for a higher price, hopefully. If they're using someone like us, especially, typically that buyer who wants to do all the fancy deal structuring, they're just going to lose out to another buyer who's like, hey, I'll just give you the cash. And from a seller's perspective, like, okay, usually that's the better deal, right? Give me more money. Give me more money up front. I'm going to take that one, right? This is why I think that this statistic might change. So as empire flippers, as we get more kind of like famous in selling these faceless YouTube channels, I think we will eventually be going higher and higher up on the valuation ladder, where we're selling $800,000 channels and eventually probably 7-figure channels in terms of their actual valuation. And once we get up to that point, I think we will see this 91% paid up front probably drop pretty dramatically. I think there's going to be a lot more deal structuring involved there. So most of the deals we sold were underneath that $200,000 range, but that percentage also includes all the way up to that $418,000 business that we did. So this tells me perhaps that you could get paid more money up front with a faceless YouTube channel than some other business models, such as niche sites right now are really struggling to get all cash offers, right? So that's interesting. But again, small data size and the list price is too small for us to say for certain, but it definitely looks interesting in that point of view. Now let's talk about the delta in between the actual listing price. So that's the sticker price of the valuation that Empire Flippers gives these channels versus the actual sales price. A lot of brokers don't ever talk about this. We are one of the few that do, and sometimes it hurts us because people are like, oh my God, they didn't sell for 100%. Unlike this broker over here, with little do you know, most of my competition, most of the other brokers, they tend to way overvalue the businesses. So their list price that they're showing you and their actual sales price tends to have a much higher margin than Empire Flippers, because Empire Flippers were always somewhat famous or infamous, depending on who you asked, of just telling the sellers straight up, like, look, this is what we think you're worth. And if the sellers are, no, I'm worth way, way more, we are often like, okay, well, come back to us when, you wake up from that dream. We're happy to sell you, right? Versus a lot of other brokers are like, oh, yeah, you're definitely worth that much. Sign my 6-month exclusivity a contract and we'll get you on board. And then they just wear the seller down post that exclusivity deal, right? To where they come down to reality in terms of the real exit price. So this is why most brokers don't actually show you what the real sales price is versus the listing price, because they know that they're selling a dream a lot of times to the entrepreneur, and they have to like break the dream after they get the entrepreneur like fatigued, right? Versus we just tell our sellers straight up typically how the process works. So when we look at these YouTube channels, we're typically seeing about the specific number is 14.76% less than the listing price. So roughly 15%. So if you have a YouTube channel, you're selling it for 100 grand, say it's making, I don't know, $3 grand, $3,500 a month. Say you're selling that 100K YouTube channel, you list it for that, you're probably going to end up selling it for right around $85,000 based on the average. So that's interesting. And this is not terribly far off from what I've seen across other business models. It is a little bit more aggressive, especially on the lower end of the market, but this isn't by any means like a crazy stat that differs wildly from other business models that we've sold. All right, so there's the quick hits, but let's go into a little bit of what makes these channels valuable in the first place. Like, why are buyers buying a faceless YouTube channel? What's the point? What are they trying to do here? So I put together some bullet points here why I personally think that the demand is very interesting. And if you're a YouTube seller, a YouTube channel owner who wants to sell a business, this might be a really, really good time for you, because YouTube channels, they tend to be pretty consistent, at least the good ones, the quality ones, with predictable revenue that has relatively steady growth patterns, right? If we look at the average age of these channels, like how long have they been around, it's right around 2.6 years. And that's pretty common with selling a business. Typically 2.5 years would be a pretty young business to sell. Often the businesses we look at tend to be over 3 years old in a lot of business models, but these channels have been around for a while. So it's not like these are fly-by-night pure AI channels. Not saying they don't use AI, they certainly, a lot of them probably do, but these are not fly-by-night channels that are just using direct robot voice or text-to robot voice, like lazy ways of creating content. They've actually refined some of their content. They have data, they have historical data that new videos perform like X, and they have previous data showing how those videos showed. Basically, what I'm saying here is these channels have a proven way of making content that people, one, they click, and two, they retain. They drive a higher retention, right? So all of that is super, super interesting. And that is super interesting to buyers too, because it's not a fly-by-night one-trick pony, do one viral video and sell the channel for 100 grand, right? They have a stable of videos. They're all producing a good amount of views on average over and over and over again. Next, the other thing that was interesting about looking at these businesses is that they all pursued, for the most part, like there's different weights to which ways they went, but most of the time there was at least 3 revenue sources that were on these YouTube channels. So you had your typical AdSense, right? Which is classic YouTube, a way of making money. But then they also had sponsorships, which are really, really nice. That is could be pretty lucrative for a lot of YouTube channels. And many of them were also doing your classic affiliate marketing. So I've often said that you can increase the value of your business if you have multiple ways where you can make money. Ideally, no one way makes up all the way you make your money. Like, not having a client that represents 60 to 70% of your revenue, right? So with these YouTube channels, we see them diversifying kind of on the lower end of the monetization models, which again, ads and affiliates and sponsorships, right? So this is good. It shows that the YouTube channel has room to grow. Like, it does not have to rely just on AdSense. And if you're going to sell a YouTube channel, I think probably some of my best advice, if you want to get at least a premium valuation, is really show that buyer, like, hey, look, I'm not limited to just Google AdSense on my YouTube videos. Like, we could do a whole bunch of other stuff here, right? Like, here's the data to prove it, right? And I would say if you could go even a step further with that, like say you can add a real service on the back end of that, or if you can like have your own digital product or maybe even physical product that you can sell on the back end of your channel, that is premium, or at least have the ability to do it. You can show like, hey, there's this expansion opportunity to that buyer to really get their wheels turning at what's possible with acquiring your channel. The other thing, and this is why I think this replaces niche sites in a lot of ways. Like niche sites are still a thing, people are still buying them, but I mean, everyone knows that whole business model has been pretty wounded heavily with how schizophrenic Google has gone. And I think YouTube channels are kind of this almost half of a bridge back to form for a lot of our audience that tends to buy more side hustle businesses, because I mean, YouTube channels are very simple to run. Like, not saying they're easy, right? You really got to figure out your processes and how to get retention, all that kind of stuff. But at its core, it's a very simple business model. You write a script, you make a video, you publish the video, make a thumbnail, there you go, right? Like the process is very simple. It's very clear what you need to do and what you need to get better at. And because of that, these businesses that are being sold that are, close to 3 years old, they already kind of have this process and have this system figured out. And a lot of times there's teams of freelancers that are kind of like transferring over to that new owner so they can just use the same exact SOPs and systems that the original seller had. And that makes these businesses semi-passive. I hate to use the word passive because nothing is truly passive. Like even investing in your typical index funds is not truly passive. You're logging in, you're setting up the automations, all that kind of stuff, right? But as far as business goes, YouTube channels are pretty passive. Faceless channels, I should say. Like this channel, I'm not passive at all. I've spent way too long setting up cameras and having issues of all sorts, right? But with faceless channels where you don't have to actually be on the camera, these businesses are pretty hands-off. Like they you can get a YouTube like project manager in there to run your whole freelancer team. And then you're just checking in with that project manager. So what this means is that this business model is very, very attractive to both high-end buyers and low-end buyers, because high-end buyers, they're probably like the reasoning for acquiring the channel is probably as a traffic asset for some other business that they're doing, versus the lower end of the buyer pool. They're looking to buy like profitable side hustles that they might be adding on top of their normal, like say 9-to-5 job, something like that, right? And these channels are very user-friendly because there's just not that many moving pieces. So that makes this model very attractive in the same way that niche sites used to be back in the day before Google going schizophrenic. One thing you might be wondering at this point, well, Greg, you know the niches. Tell me, what was the best niche? And you'll be happily disappointed because I'm going to give you the same answer that I basically give to everyone that asks me, like, what niche should I go into? So if we look at the channels we sold, there is no one niche that is dominating. It is almost weirdly equal across everything. So we had religion, we had news and education, automotive, entertainment, and of course technology, like technology review kind of channels. And they all perform well. And this goes back to what I've often told people, like, yeah, niche is important in a lot of ways, but it's not as important as you think. What's more important is that you are creating good content that people really like and that the niche can support revenue. So when I think about like choosing a niche, I'm not really thinking about like what's hot right now, what's trending or whatever. I'm looking more for what's sustainable. And not only is it sustainable, but what has enough things in it to make content about, and is there an opportunity to make revenue here? So if I'm looking at a niche, I do what I've already just said here. I would ask myself, can it make money with ads? And most things can, check. Are there affiliate programs for the thing? And I'm looking at that for a little bit of an ulterior motive, not just to make money through those affiliate programs, but the fact that there are affiliate programs tells me that there are actual products or services in the niche that maybe I can get into. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what I would want is to use the YouTube channel as a traffic channel for a much higher margin business down the road. So this is what I would be looking for in terms of niches versus say like compilation channels or creepy camping videos or whatever, which are great. Don't get me wrong. I love a good creepy story on YouTube, but the revenue opportunity is much, much lower typically, right? If you are a YouTuber doing these faceless YouTube channels, how can you really maximize your exit to really appeal to a broad base of these buyers? Because like I said, you got people who want to buy side hustles, who are just starting out maybe in their business buying journey. And so they view a YouTube channel acquisition as like an obvious first step. And then you got people who want to buy your channel as like a traffic generator for their other stuff that they're doing. So if you want to sell your channel for the most, I would recommend you really focus on building systems. Not just your content, like of course you need content, that's the workhorse of a channel, but you really need to create comprehensive SOPs and not just standard operating procedures. I would really look at making playbooks. So playbooks are like SOPs on crack. They are like, you do this is how it works, blah, 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 blah. And they take a core process of what you're doing and really breaks it down and goes into high detail. And not just high detail what to do, but why are you doing it? And then you can give that to, like if you are able to do that and give it to the buyer, what's that going to do for the buyer? It's going to make them a whole lot more confident that they can take your channel and actually do something with it, right? Next, I would focus on storytelling. Retention is the name of the game. It's something we struggle with a ton on this channel. So if you're still here, you better like this video. Please like it. But focusing on storytelling stuff really helps you increase your retention. So the more you can kind of incorporate that into your content, the higher retention you're going to get, which means your video will probably be shared a lot more, which will make a lot more money, which of course will help your valuation when you go to sell the business. Now, I already mentioned diversifying revenue, like beyond AdSense, so I'm not going to repeat myself there, but revenue diversity, extremely important if you want to maximize the valuation. Not required. You don't need to have multiple revenue channels to sell a business. We have certainly sold many businesses in general that only have one product or core service. So that's fine. But if your goal is to maximize, I would recommend, hey, how can I diversify how this channel is making money? Then, of course, maintaining clean, separate financial records. I have a lot of friends that they run multiple channels at this point, and I'd imagine it's all just grouped into a very ugly spreadsheet / QuickBooks with all the channels' earnings. If that's you, don't do that. You make them each separate, so it's very clear to the buyer that yes, this belongs to this channel. Now, if you use us, if you decide to sell your channel with us and help us give you, 6 figures or more in your pocket, we of course will help you do that and build your P&L so you don't have to worry about it. All you would need to do is click Sell My Business, which is a button below this video. You can go ahead and help my KPIs, help my retention and my KPIs by selling your YouTube channel with me today. And then the other thing I would say is extremely important for YouTube channels in general, and really every business, but YouTube channels, I think especially wouldn't want this, is your growth rate. Can you demonstrably show like, hey, yeah, I am growing, say like 10% year over year. And if you're 3 years old, that shows like, hey, this is not just like random chance. I actually know what I'm doing, and I'm going to tell you how to do it once you acquire my business, right? Like very few people will be interested in buying a YouTube channel with say like 200 videos, and the vast majority of them have, 20 views, but there's just that one video that for whatever reason popped and did 1 million views in like, a month or less or something like that. Like if you have those channels, great. But if you're trying to sell your channel, that is going to put the buyer off because like, okay, well, they had one success. They don't even know how to repeat it because they haven't had another video that broke over 100 views. So why would I buy this? Like I'm basically just buying that one video, right? And it doesn't even get that much traffic anymore because whatever traffic was coming to it has diminished, right? It's the law of diminishing returns. So you want to be able to show consistent growth, consistent metrics from video to video. Ideally, each video is getting better than the last, though that's probably not realistic. So really you want to be able to show it over a time frame of your growth, both in revenue-wise and traffic-wise. Now, one final thing here, and this is something most YouTube channels don't do. In fact, I don't believe any of the channels we sold did this. So you don't have to do this. But again, if you want to maximize your valuation, as long as you chose your niche well, where it's possible for you to do this, where it makes sense, I would highly recommend you build a newsletter in addition to the YouTube channel. So if you're building something in finance, technology, whatever, these are great niches to build newsletters in, where it's, there's news, there's updates, strategies, tips, tricks, strategy, like all that kind of stuff, right? You can do a weekly newsletter that way, and you could probably use AI to take what you're doing with your videos to translate that into the newsletter if you want to be lazy about it, or does it add like more work for you? Now, the reason why I say to do this is because in my view, the most valuable businesses that are bought tend to also come with the customer data. With YouTube, you have a big platform risk, right? YouTube owns you if you're living on rented land. So the more you can do to diversify away from the rented land to own land, as in your email list, the more value you're going to get. Plus, that opens up a whole new door of revenue opportunities for you, because with a newsletter, now you can do sponsorships as well, or promote your own products, right? And you're able to communicate with your fans over and over again at will, versus like just relying on a YouTube community post and hoping people see it, right? Which sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. I think it has a pretty low hit rate in general, but that would be my advice. So if you want to sell your YouTube channel and make close to $500,000 or more, you can go ahead and find out what your YouTube channel is worth by clicking the link down below. Looking forward to selling your channel. Talk to you soon.